Speak. Prosody rate equals 90%. Discover the story of Irene of Constantinople, the queen who ruled 2 empires and fell into oblivion. How a powerful woman ended up disappearing from history books. Subscribe and activate the bell so as not to miss anything. Imagine, for a moment, the opulence of Constantinople in the 7th century. There, in the midst of the Byzantine imperial splendor, Irene was born, daughter of a general. His early life remains wrapped in a mystery that history has not yet managed to unravel completely. But what we do know is that its beauty and intelligence catapults it to an extraordinary destiny, a destiny that would lead to the top of power, to govern not 1, but 2 empires. His rise to power was not an easy path. Through palatial intrigues and strategic alliances, Irene made way in the imperial court. He married Leon IV, the emperor, and although his marriage was not exempt from difficulties, he gave birth to Constantine VI, his son and heir to the throne. Irene's influence grew over the years, consolidating himself as a key figure in Byzantine political life. After the death of Leon IV, Irene became the regent of her son, Constantine VI, who was still a child. But Irene's ambition exceeded the limits of the regency. She yearned for absolute power, the total control of the empire. With cunning and determination, he wove a network of alliances and manipulated the circumstances in his favor, preparing the terrain for a radical change in the destiny of the Byzantine Empire. A veil of mystery covers its first years. Daughter of a general. His childhood in Constantinople, between the bustle of the market and the splendor of the imperial palaces, must have been a mixture of contrasts. Imagine little Irene, perhaps playing in the palace gardens, surrounded by servants and far from her father's life. A man accustomed to battles and politics. What dreams that girl housed in her heart. Did your imperial destiny guessed? His ascent was not a linear trajectory. The life in the Byzantine court was complex, a network of intrigues and alliances where luck and cunning played a crucial role. His father's position undoubtedly opened some doors, but the way to power was far from being easy. He had to navigate with intelligence, caution, and perhaps also with a dose of ambition among the noble families that competed for the imperial favor. Despite his humble origins, compared to the imperial elite, Irene demonstrated exceptional intelligence and innate talent for politics. He learned to move with grace in that maze of power, to weave strategic alliances, to interpret the signals of the political game. His ascent was not a product of chance, but of his ability to recognize opportunities and act with decision. But that childhood wrapped in mystery led to an imperial destination. Imagine. You, a promising young woman, become the wife of Emperor Leon IV. A political link, no doubt, but that catapulted you to the heart of the Byzantine Empire. The weight of the crown, the responsibility of governing, all of that in you, still young, even with the innocence of a girl between the walls of Constantinople. Leon IV, a powerful man, but also an emperor with his own weaknesses. Your marriage was not just a political act, it was also the beginning of a complex power relationship. Note how the Byzantine court, with its intrigues and its struggles for the imperial favor, became your new battlefield. Each movement, each decision had high-reach consequences. The premature death of Leon IV marked a turning point. Suddenly, you, his wife, were at the center of a struggle for succession. Your son, Constantine VI, was still a child. That fragility, that dependence, made you the regent, the true ruler in the shadow of the young emperor. The power, which had previously approached, now was offered in a silver tray, wrapped in imperial mourning. But imperial happiness was ephemeral. The premature death of Leon IV left you in a vulnerable position, surrounded by ambitious courtiers who saw in the young Constantine, your son, an obstacle. The palatial intrigues began to weave around you, whispers in the halls of the palace, accusing looks, secret alliances that threatened to destabilize the empire. You, a young widow and regent, were in the eye of the hurricane. You faced the opposition of powerful eunuchs, ambitious and noble generals who longed for power. Every decision you made was analyzed, criticized, and used against you. The court was divided into factions, each fighting on its own agenda, seeking to control the young Constantine and, therefore, the empire. The fight for supremacy was constant, a mortal game of alliances and betrayals. Prosody. Speak. Speak, the prosody rate equals 90%. The conspiracy intensified. You were accused of heresy, of betrayal, of conspiring against the empire itself. Your enemies slandered you, spreading rumors and lies to discredit you. Your position was precarious, Damocles' sword hung on your head, threatening to end your reign and, possibly, with your life. Your ability to navigate these turbulent waters would determine your destination. Thus, you became a regent, a woman in a world of men, governing in your child's name. Imagine the pressure. The inquisitive looks of the court, the whispers in the shadows, the constant threat of a conspiracy. You had to demonstrate your worth, your intelligence, your ability to handle the reins of the empire, something that nobody expected of a woman at that time. Your government as a regent was an act of constant balance. You had to navigate between the rival factions of the court, win the support of the army and, above all, protect your son, the young Constantine, from the ambitions of those who saw in him an obstacle to their own rise to power. You had to make difficult, sometimes unpopular decisions to maintain the stability of the empire. But your political ability and firmness allowed you to consolidate your power. Over time, you were able to overcome conspiracies and palatial intrigues, demonstrating to all that you were a capable ruler, a woman who could govern with firmness and justice, even exceeding the expectations of the most skeptical. The empire flourished under your guardianship, at least for a while. But the regency was not just political. It was also the responsibility of molding the future emperor. Constantine VI, your son, was the center of your universe. His education became your obsession, a strategy to ensure the stability of the empire and, perhaps, your own legacy. I imagined a cultured emperor, wise, capable of governing with justice and firmness. To do this, you carefully selected the best tutors, teachers who instill not only classical knowledge, but also the arts of diplomacy and government. It was not just books and lessons. Your goal was to train a leader, not a scholar. Therefore, you taught him to ride, to handle the weapons, to understand the complexities of war and military strategy. Military strategy lessons were given not only in the classroom, but also in strategic maneuvers, observing soldiers and learning from their experiences. In addition to military and academic instruction, you also instilled the importance of faith and Byzantine tradition. Religious ceremonies, audiences with the patriarch and imperial rituals were an integral part of their formation. You were frequently seen sharing with him moments of prayer and reflection, in which you taught him not only doctrine, but also the importance of imperial image and protocol. His education became your obsession, but also the germ of the conflict. While Constantine grew, he learned not only about the government but also about power, and he began to question your authority, to see your regency not as a guide, but as an imposition. The military strategy lessons, which you taught him with so much zeal, now seemed to feed his youth ambition, an ambition that collided with your strong will. The young emperor, with the support of some ambitious nobles who saw in him a way of weakening your power, began to make decisions without consulting you. His first acts of government, although apparently lower, showed a growing independence, a sign that the seed of discord had taken root. You, accustomed to absolute control, could not tolerate this insubordination. The tension between mother and son, initially subtle, became increasingly palpable. Disputes on imperial policy became common. Private discussions became more heated, from debates about strategy to clashes of wills. His growing disobedience hurt you deeply. It was not just a matter of power, but a betrayal of the confidence and maternal love that you thought to have shared. The crack between you two widened, threatening to fracture the empire itself. Constantine's distrust of his mother had become a real threat. His conspiracy murmurs reached Irene's ears, who, with a mixture of cunning and firmness, began to act. He knew his position was precarious. The legitimacy of his reign was constantly questioned. Every day was a battle to maintain control, to show that she, a woman, was able to govern the vast empire. His strategy was relentless. He consolidated his power through strategic alliances, rewarding those who swore loyalty and silently eliminating his opponents. The Byzantine court, an intrigue's hotbed, became a silent battlefield where each movement was calculated, each word a weapon. Prosody is speak. Speak, prosody rate equals 90%. The opposition, however, did not give up easily. The nobles, accustomed to the power of male emperors, conspired in the shadow, weaving resistance networks against Irene's government. But she, with her intelligence and determination, anticipated her movements, neutralizing her threats before they could materialize. Each victory strengthened her, consolidating her image as a capable, although ruthless ruler. Imagine the Byzantine Empire in the 7th century. A weakened giant, but still imposing Constantinople, the capital, shone with the splendor of centuries of history. But the cracks began to appear. The power of the emperor, although absolute in theory, was constantly challenged by the ambitious nobility and the palatial intrigues. The threat of the Arab invaders, who pressed from the east, was a constant in the daily life of the empire. Civil wars and dynastic disputes were the bread of each day. And in the midst of all that chaos, you find the story of Irene. The empire, despite its internal problems, remained an important force in the Mediterranean. Its influence extended through vast territories, from the coast of Asia Minor to Italy and the Balkans. But wealth and power could not hide the deep divisions that threatened to tear it. The Orthodox Church, with its powerful influence, played a crucial role in imperial politics, often acting as a referee in disputes between rival factions. Remember that this context of instability is essential to understand Irene's actions. The Byzantine economy, although rich, was also subjected to pressures. The constant wars and enemy incursions exhausted the resources of the empire. Corruption, endemic in administration, aggravated the situation. Agriculture, the basis of the economy, suffered from political instability and bad harvests. So, for Irene, navigating these turbulent waters was not an easy task. His intelligence and ambition were his only weapon in this game of power. But those cracks failed to stop Irene. When assuming power, he faced an empire in crisis. His first task was to stabilize the economy. Devastated by decades of wars and poor administration, he implemented fiscal reforms, seeking a more just and efficient tax collection, reducing the load on the peasants and increasing the pressure on the nobility that had evading his obligations. Remember that for her, the prosperity of the empire was fundamental. Irene understood that a strong empire needed a solid administration. Therefore, he dedicated himself to reforming the imperial bureaucracy, fighting corruption and inefficiency that plague it. That he appointed competent and loyal officials, promoting meritocracy instead of the nepotism that the administration had weakened for years. This was a crucial step to restore order and trust in the imperial government. In addition to administrative reforms, Irene focused on justice. He implemented new laws to protect the most vulnerable of society, trying to reduce inequality and oppression. He sought a balance between the imperial authority and the well-being of his subjects, something fundamental for the stability of the empire. For you, what do you think of Irene's management in this regard? But internal stability was not enough. Irene knew that she should deal with the residents of the empire. The Arabs, in the south, remained a constant threat, and their incursions into Byzantine territory required a firm response. He had to negotiate with them, looking for peace through treaties, although sometimes diplomacy broke and returned to war, as happened on the Syrian border. To the north, the empire faced the Bulgarians, a warrior people who constantly pressed the borders. Irene, with cunning, combined military force with negotiations to keep them at bay. Sometimes, he used marriage as a political tool, marrying members of the imperial family with Bulgarian nobles to strengthen ties and avoid conflicts. But when the diplomacy failed, the Byzantine army responded with forcefulness. In the west, the situation was more complex. The papacy, with his political ambitions, represented a challenge to the imperial authority. Irene had to carefully navigate relations with Rome, seeking to maintain the unity of Christianity while defending the interests of the empire. This implied delicate and sometimes concessions, although always maintaining the firmness necessary to preserve Byzantine sovereignty. But the outer threat did not eclipse cultural flowering during Irene's reign. Imagine the dazzling mosaics of the Byzantine churches, with their gold and their stylized figures, representing biblical scenes full of symbolism. They were masterpieces that reflected the richness and power of the empire, and you could appreciate their beauty even today if you could travel in time. Prosody? Speak. Speak, the prosody rate equals 90%. The Byzantine architecture of the Irene era was characterized by its imposing domes and its majestic structures, designed to inspire astonishment and veneration. Think of Hagia Sophia, a perfect example of the architectural greatness of that time. Its proportions, its design, everything was calculated to leave you breathless. And not only the architecture shone, literature also flourished. Although many texts have been lost over the centuries, imagine scribes working tirelessly on their enlightened manuscript, creating literary works that, although today they are inaccessible to you, were fundamental for the culture of the time. They were history books, treatises of philosophy, epic poems. a world of knowledge embodied in parchments. But what role did the church play in Byzantium's political life? Imagine. The emperor, considered a representative of God on earth, depended closely on the Patriarch of Constantinople, the highest religious authority. His alliance was essential to maintain the order and legitimacy of imperial power. Think of the impressive religious ceremonies, where the emperor actively participated, thus reinforcing his divine image and his link with the church. The church not only blessed political decisions but also directly influenced them. The patriarchs, with their enormous influence on the population, could support or disapprove the actions of the emperor, generating a significant impact on their popularity and political stability. Remember that religion was the center of Byzantine life, and the church had immense power over people's morals and beliefs. Theological disputes could also have devastating political consequences. Think of religious schisms and debates that divided the population, creating confronted political factions. The emperor had to carefully navigate this complex panorama, seeking the balance between the secular power and the spiritual influence of the church to maintain unity and peace in its empire. Well, imagine the controversy that unleashed the destruction of religious icons. The iconoclasts believed that the veneration of images was idolatry, a heresy that contaminated the purity of the Christian faith. You might think that it was a simple theological dispute, but in reality, it was a struggle for power between the emperor and the church, a conflict that divided the empire for decades. Emperor Leo III, promoted by his directors and perhaps for his own convictions, initiated a relentless campaign against sacred images. Think of the iconoclast fury. Looted churches, destroyed icons, persecuted monks. A true religious storm that left a deep scar in the Byzantine Empire. Can you imagine the people's reaction to the destruction of their venerated images? But the fight did not end there. The resistance to iconoclasia was fierce. Empress Irene, whom we will talk about later, played a key role in the restoration of the images. Imagine the ideological battle. Theologians discussing, emperors legislating, the divided people. A time of deep religious and political transformations that forever marked the history of Byzantium. But Irene's ascension was not exempt from challenges. Many Byzantine nobles, accustomed to male power, saw with suspicion a woman on the throne. Remember that Byzantine society was deeply patriarchal, and the idea of a ruling empress was something radical. These noble, powerful, and with strong ties between them, conspired in the shadow, looking for any weakness to dethrone it. His murmurs and plots extended by the courts and palaces, creating an environment of constant uncertainty. Within the army, there was also a strong opposition. Some ambitious generals, thirst for power, saw in the situation an opportunity to take control. For them, a woman on the throne was a sign of weakness, a vulnerability that could exploit. Military intrigues were woven, with the risk of latent civil lifting and wars. The threat of a military rebellion was a Damocles sword on Irene's head. In addition to the noble and military, the church also played an important role in opposition to Irene. Some clergy, clinging to patriarchal traditions, rejected their authority. Although she herself was devout and struggled to maintain religious harmony, the resistance of certain ecclesiastical sectors weakened her government and contributed to the atmosphere of instability. Remember that the church had immense power in the Byzantine Empire, and its opposition was a formidable obstacle. But despite the opposition, Irene's determination was unwavering. With the support of some key generals and the skilled manipulation of the political situation, he managed to get the young Constantine VI to be Coronado Emperor. But who really held power? You, attentive observer of history, already intuits it. /prosody, s/speak. Speak, to prosody rate equals 90%. The coronation ceremony was an impressive show. Imagine the majesty of Hagia Sophia, full of noble dresses with silks and jewels, the aroma of incense and the song of the priests. Irene, with a glowing imperial crown, watched everything with a cold and calculator look. He was not only the emperor's mother, but his regent, the true force behind the throne. Although Constantine VI was the nominal emperor, Irene was the one who made crucial decisions. She controlled the army, the imperial treasure, and, most importantly, the administration of the vast empire. Its influence extended to every corner of the government. Consolidating its power day after day, coronation was not just a symbolic act. It was the beginning of his real reign, a reign that would challenge the conventions of his time. Thus, Irene ruled as a regent, first, and then as a solo empress. His reign was marked by fascinating ambivalence. On the one hand, he promoted the Byzantine culture and arts. Churches restored, sponsored artists and theologians, and consolidated Constantinople's position as the Mediterranean cultural center. True architectural jewels and works of art left their workshops. Imagine the beauty of the mosaics and the greatness of constructions, all thanks to their sponsorship. But his government also had his shadows. Her ambition, which led her to power, also led her to make unpopular decisions. The economy of the empire suffered during his reign, despite his efforts to stabilize it. Increase in taxes and an unstable monetary system are some examples of bad economic management. And then there is the controversy of his own coronation, a bold decision that challenged tradition and caused a lot of friction. Irene tried to modernize the army, but its reforms were not entirely effective, leaving the empire vulnerable to external threats. The incursions of the Arabs continued, and the defense of the borders became a constant challenge. Despite its cultural achievements and its attempt to strengthen the economy and the army, its reign left a complex and contradictory legacy. Remember that Irene not only dedicated himself to artistic patronage. His reign was also characterized by important administrative reforms. He worried about improving the efficiency of the imperial government, simplifying the bureaucracy and fighting the corruption that the system imagined. Byzantine officials, formerly so indolent, now subject to more rigorous scrutiny thanks to their new laws. One of its main objectives was the reform of the judicial system. New laws were implemented to ensure impartiality and equitable justice. Think about the complexity of Byzantine society, with its different social strata and its constant disputes. Irene tried to establish a fairer legal system, although reality was, as always, much more complex. Irene's reforms sought to strengthen the empire, not only in their cultural aspect, but also in its administrative and judicial structure. Its intention was to modernize the system, make it more efficient and less susceptible to corruption. Although not all its reforms succeeded, its attempt to create a fairer and more effective government is an important legacy of its controversial reign. But how did Irene manage the economy of the empire? At first, his reign brought prosperity. Remember the administrative reforms that I mentioned before? These improvements promoted the efficiency of tax collection, which meant an increase in imperial coffers. This allowed to finance large construction projects, such as the restoration of churches and the creation of new monuments, in turn generating work and economic movement. However, the bonanza did not last forever. Excessive spending on luxury projects and the constant struggle to maintain control of the empire, including wars and palatial intrigues, began to wear imperial finances. The maintenance of a large army and the expensive military campaigns were a constant weight for state coffers. Little by little, accumulated wealth began to diminish. As his reign progressed, the Byzantine economy under Irene's government faced a growing instability. Inflation began to affect the population, and merchants were forced to raise the prices of their products. The consequences of this deteriorated economic situation began to be palpable in people's daily lives, generating social discomfort and threatening the stability of the empire. The initial opulence of Irene's reign gave way to a much more precarious situation. Prosody? Prosody rate equals 90%. That economic prosperity, however, did not benefit everyone equally. Byzantine society was a complex pyramid. At the top, you had the emperor, the supreme figure with absolute power. Below, the aristocracy, composed of influential families with vast properties and a great political weight. It was the landowners, those who controlled the field and much of the richness of the empire. Think of them as the magnates of the time, but with noble titles and much more influence. Then, the middle class came, a more heterogeneous group. Here you would find merchants, artisans, small landowners, and government officials. His life was more varied, depending on his profession and fortune. Some lived comfortably, others struggled to survive. Imagine the bustling streets of Constantinople, full of activity with handmade workshops and market stalls. Finally, at the base of the pyramid was the great mass of the population. The peasants. Most worked the earth, often subject to the will of the great landowners. His life was hard, marked by agricultural work and poverty. Remember that agriculture was the basis of the Byzantine economy, and these peasants were the ones who supported it. Their lives, although less glamorous, were crucial for the functioning of the empire. Imagine life in Constantinople, back in the 7th century. You, a simple craftsman, get up with the sun, the aroma of freshly baked bread and the bustle of the city already wrapping you. Your workshop, small but cozy, is full of the smell of wood and metal. You start your day, hands tanned for work, creating everyday objects. A chair for a humble house, a candlestick for an opulent church, small pieces that contribute to the gear of the big city. At noon, the heat of the sun is relentless. You are looking for refuge in a bustling tavern, where people meet to eat and chat. At a plate of lentils and bread, a glass of watery wine, are your humble feast. You listen to the conversations, mix of Greek and other languages, the murmur of stories and rumors that spread like the smoke of the chimneys. In the afternoon, work awaits you again. The sound of the sea, the constant murmur of life in the streets, accompanies you while you return to your workshop. The sun puts on, painting the sky with reddish and golden tones on the domes of the churches and the palaces. The day ends, exhausting but satisfactory. Tomorrow, the cycle will begin again. But returning to Irene, imagine how he handled the complex network of international relations. She, a woman in a world of men, understood that the survival of the empire depended on strategic alliances. It was not only military force, but a subtle and effective diplomacy, weaving ties with different kingdoms to ensure the stability of Constantinople. Think of the letters he sent, the ambassadors I received, the negotiations he carried out. Each decision, each signed treaty represented a delicate balance of power that he had to keep external enemies at bay, but also manage internal rivalries, and all this with a grace and firmness that made it a respected figure, although sometimes feared. His alliances were not just policies. He also knew how to cultivate relationships with religious leaders and influential figures from other empires. These ties, beyond the brute force, provided a crucial support network in times of crisis and allowed him to consolidate his power and the influence of Constantinople on the international scenario. She not only governed, but woven an intricate plot of relations that ensured the survival of her empire. But those alliances did not always guarantee peace. You can imagine the constant pressure on the borders of the empire. The Arabs, with their military power, stalked in the east, launching incursions that tested the resistance of the Byzantine troops. Irene had to deal with these threats, strengthening defenses and ordering military campaigns to repel the invasions. In the north, the Bulgarians, with their fierce war tactics and their mobility in the field, represented another significant threat. Think of the long military campaigns that Irene had to order to ensure the borders of the north, the strategies she had to design to counteract the brute force of the Bulgarians and the courage of her soldiers. Not only was it defended, but also to maintain control over conquered territories. Imagine the battles for the possession of strategic cities, negotiations with rebel peoples, the need to maintain efficient military force and willing to intervene at any time. Managing all this while seeing you as a woman governing an empire was a monumental challenge. Prosody, speak. Speak. Prosody rate equals 90%. The Arab incursions forced Irene to strengthen the defenses of the empire. Imagine the walls of Constantinople, imposing and resistant, reinforced with strategically located towers. It was invested in the renewal of defense systems, improving existing fortifications to withstand prolonged sieges. The maintenance of the walls was a crucial task, a continuous work of repair and reinforcement. Remember that the security of the empire depended on the strength of its defenses. But the walls were not the only line of defense. Think of Irene's military strategies. The creation of a powerful fleet to control the seas and protect the coasts of enemy attacks. It was essential to control the sea to avoid the landing of enemy troops. In addition, early alert systems were implemented, with vigils at strategic points to detect any suspicious movement. The speed of the response was vital for the survival of the empire. Military preparation was constant. Byzantine soldiers, rigorously trained, were ready to defend the empire at any time. Regular military maneuvers were carried out to maintain their efficiency and coordination. Remember that the defense of the empire not only depended on the walls, but also on the efficacy of the army and its ability to respond to threats. Irene's military strategy was based on prevention and rapid response capacity. But the walls could not protect the empire from palatial intrigues. Constantine VI, still young, already ruled with the help of his mother, but his reign was far from safe. You will see how Irene's ambition began to grow, feeding a desire for absolute power that eclipsed any family loyalty. Irene, with political mastery, was weaving a network of alliances, winning the favor of the nobles and the support of the army, little by little. He undermined his son's authority, sowing doubt among his directors. Imagine the secret conversations, the furtive looks and the whispers in the corridors of the palace, while the shadow of the conspiracy extended. Finally, the moment of truth came. In a rapid and efficient coup d'état, Irene deposed her own son. Constantine VI, surprised and without support, was banished. His reign truncated in an abrupt way. For you, the image of a young emperor losing his crown will be shocking, a symbol of the relentless power of ambition. So, after the fall of Constantine VI, you will ask yourself, how did Irene fix themselves to stay in power? The answer, in large part, lies in its ability to control the image that project the world. Irene understood the power of propaganda and used it with a mastery to consolidate her authority. Imagine the coins coined with their effigy, always represented with an idealized beauty, an image that transmitted power and legitimacy. Its decrees and edicts, carefully written, spread throughout the empire, reinforcing its authority and presenting it as a fair and wise ruler. They were not allowed public dissidents. The information was strongly controlled. The historians of the time, favored or even bought by the imperial court, were responsible for narrating a convenient version of the facts, silencing any criticism of their reign. The works of art, the mosaics and the sculptures showed Irene as a pious figure, close to God, and therefore, invested with a divine authority. Thus, his image was projected in all spheres of public life, building an inviolability aura. But governing was not a walk through the imperial garden, right? Irene faced constant threats. Ambitious nobleness, discontent generals and influential priests plotted in the shadow, looking for any crack in their power armor to dethrone it. Every day was a battle to maintain control, a fight against palatial intrigues that sought their fall. Remember that the legitimacy of his reign was always questioned. Many saw in her a usurper, a woman who had taken the throne from her own son. These doubts fueled the conspiracies, with powerful nobles planning coups d'états that stripped it of power and plunged it into oblivion. The murmuring in court were constant, a latent threat that forced her to always be alert. Some plots were discarded in time, others resulted in summary executions or exiles. The Byzantine court became a hotbed of trade ions and changing alliances. Irene, with your political cunning, knew how to navigate these turbulent waters, crushing your enemies with relentless efficiency. But the threat never disappeared completely, always latent, like a dragon waiting for your opportunity. Prosody / speak. Speak. Prosody rate equals 90%. But those were not just murmurs. Do you imagine the tension in the palace? Each whisper, every furtive look, could mean a lone conspiracy. Irene had to maintain control, deal with nobles who saw in their possession an opportunity to climb, to enrich themselves at the expense of the empire. He had powerful enemies, willing to use any means to dethrone it. The struggle for power was constant, visceral, and every day it could be the last. The generals, with their military ambitions, represented another threat. Some wanted more power, others saw in Irene a weakness that could explode. Can you imagine the risk of a military rebellion in the heart of the empire? It was a real danger, a Damocles sword on the head of the empress. Military intrigues mixed with policies, creating a maze of alliances and betrayals. And we cannot forget the church. The priests, with their influence on the population, were key pieces in the game of power. Some supported Irene, others conspired against him. Religion and politics were intertwined dangerously, and theological disputes could have devastating political consequences. Irene had to navigate carefully among the turbulent waters of faith and power. And so, after years of intrigues and power, the end came. Do you imagine the coup d'état? A silent dawn, but loaded with tension. The imperial guards, formerly loyal, now changed the side, their inexpressive faces after their armor. Irene, the empress, the woman who ruled 2 empires, looked surrounded, her reign reaching her bitter final. The throne, a symbol of his power, now became a mute witness of his fall. Stripped of his title, his wealth, his power, the image of the powerful empress, now reduced to a prisoner, is heartbreaking. They took her away, far from Constantinople, to an exile that for many meant forgotten. Can you imagine that feeling, to make an empire reign to be a simple exile, with the uncertainty of the future threatening each dawn? A remote monastery, far from the brightness and splendor of the imperial court, became its new abode. There, surrounded by stone and silence walls, the former Imperatrice Irene spent her last days. That I imagine the contrast. From imperial purple to monarchical austerity, from the clamor of the crowd to the wind whisper between the stones, that a silent ending, a forgotten end for a woman who once ruled 2 empires. But his fall did not erase his footprint. Think about the influence it had on the imperial administration. Irene modernized the tax system, implementing new strategies to raise funds, something fundamental for the stability of the empire. His reign, although turbulent, left a legacy in economic management, laying the foundations for future reforms. In addition, his interest in art and culture left an indelible brand. Remember the impressive architectural and artistic works that were carried out during your government. The renovations in Hagia Sophia and the promotion of artists and artisans contributed to the cultural splendor of Constantinople, a legacy that endured over time. Imagine the impact of your patronage on Byzantine artistic development. Although his reign ended in disgrace, its impact on international relations is also significant. Irene negotiated strategic treaties and alliances, seeking to maintain the peace and stability of the Byzantine Empire in front of her enemies. His diplomatic skill, despite the circumstances, avoided major conflicts, consolidating the position of Byzantium on the global stage of the time. Think about the complexity of the decisions he had to make in that context. But his legacy transcends politics. Did you know that Irene was a great patron of the arts? Imagine the bustling workshops of artists and artisans working on their orders. She promoted the creation of dazzling mosaics, masterpieces that still dazzle us with her beauty and technique. Think of the vibrant colors, in the golden brightness of gold, in the precision of each piece. She raised Byzantine art to new heights, leaving an indelible brand in art history. In addition to the mosaics, Irene also sponsored literature and calligraphy. Remember those illuminated manuscripts, true jewels of the time, with intricate letters and thorough drawings. The copy and translation of classic texts were commissioned, preserving invaluable knowledge for future generations. Thanks to its support, the Byzantine culture flourished, creating an extraordinary literary and artistic legacy that lasts to this day. Prosody, speak. Speak, the prosody rate equals 90%. His influence on architecture was also significant. Think of the churches and palaces that were built or restored under their reign, imposing structures that reflect the greatness and power of the Byzantine Empire. She commissioned the construction of new buildings and the renewal of others, leaving an indelible architectural mark in Constantinople. These monuments were not only symbols of power, but also art and culture centers, radiating the influence of their patronage. But his reign, as bright as a Byzantine mosaic, came to an end at Irene's death in 803 Raps, a mystery that still fascinates historians. Was it a coup d'état? A sudden disease? The chronicles offer contradictory versions, leaving a veil of uncertainty about their last moments. Imagine the atmosphere in the palace, the Palaciga intrigue at its expression, while the powerful empress was debated between life and death. Its burial, just as enigmatic, further feeds speculation. Some sources speak of a lavish funeral, worthy of their imperial status, with all the pomp and circumstance of the Byzantine court. Others, however, mention a discreet burial, almost secret, made in an unknown place. Think about the difference between a majestic tomb in a monumental church and a hidden grave, without any ostentation. The lack of precise records about the place of his grave has given rise to numerous theories and legends. Some believe that their grave is somewhere hidden within the same Constantinople, hoping to be discovered. Others, which was secretly transferred to a remote monastery, far from the bustle of the court. Can you imagine the search for your lost tomb, a historical enigma that endures through the centuries? His death, wrapped in mystery, marked the beginning of his oblivion. Unlike other Byzantine emperors, whose exploits were recorded in the annals of history with gold letters, Irene's figure gradually faded. You will wonder, why? The answer is not simple, and is in a complex interaction of political, cultural factors and, why not say it, pure chance. The lack of a stable dynasty in his name played a crucial role. Unlike emperors with direct heirs who perpetuated his legacy, Irene did not leave a succession line that kept his memory alive. His reign, although powerful, ended without a figure that transmitted his achievements to future generations. This condemned her to oblivion, to be a footnote instead of a main chapter. In addition, the story, as you know, is often written by the victors. Irene's successors, possibly interested in minimizing their impact or even erasing their memory, could have contributed to their progressive oblivion. The manipulation of historical records, the suppression of information, or simply the lack of interest in highlighting their figure are factors that contributed to their fading in collective memory. Finally, the passage of time and the lack of detailed primary sources on their reign have greatly hindered the complete reconstruction of their history. The few existing references have been interpreted in a diverse way, creating a fragmented and, therefore, less attractive image for later historians. It is easy to forget who is difficult to remember. But wait, Irene's story doesn't end there. New investigations are reviewing their reign, leaving behind the image of an ambitious and cruel ruler that ancient historians painted you. Its economic and administrative reforms are being analyzed, showing a period of relative stability and prosperity for the empire. His alleged despotism is now questioned, suggesting that he was perhaps the victim of palatial intrigues and that his negative image was built by his enemies. Attention to its patronage of arts and culture is being paid, digging up evidence of its support for the construction of churches and the preservation of manuscripts. You will see, the image you have of it as a dark and forgotten figure is being challenged by studies that reveal a more complex and nuanced facet of its personality and its government. Analyzing historical sources with a critical eye, experts seek to understand the political and social context in which he ruled. His role as a woman in a world dominated by men is being reinterpreted, analyzing how he exceeded social and political barriers to get to power and how he ruled for a turbulent period. It is no longer seen as a usurper, but as a figure that, despite the obstacles, tried to maintain the stability of the empire. It is a slow process, but the re-evaluation of Irene's legacy is revealing a much more fascinating and human story than was believed. Prosody, speak. Speak, prosody rate equals 90%. But what did it mean to be a woman and empress in the Byzantium of the 7th century? Imagine pressure, constant scrutiny. You, instead, would have to navigate a world dominated by men, where every decision, every movement, was analyzed under the magnifying glass of tradition and patriarchal power. Irene had to face this, demonstrating a strength and political intelligence that few men of her time possessed. Women in the Byzantine Empire had a limited role in official policy, but indirectly influenced. Think of the women of the court, the imperial consorts, which, through their influence on the emperors, could mold political decisions. Irene, however, transferred those limits, becoming a central figure not only because of its proximity to power but by its own capacity. His reign was an exception, a challenge to the norm. She showed that women, with adequate skill and determination, could effectively govern. But remember, its success was not an easy path. That he had to overcome palatial intrigues, conspiracies, and the constant threat of those who saw in their possession an unacceptable anomaly. Its history is, therefore, a testimony of female resilience in a world that tried to relegate it. For centuries, Irene's figure has been interpreted in very different ways. Sometimes, she presents her as a powerful and intelligent ruler, a woman who challenged the conventions of her time and achieved great things. Other times, he portrays it as an ambitious tyrant, an intriguing who used his power for his own benefit, even blinding his own son. How to interpret your legacy? The story, written mostly by men, often reflects the prejudices of his time. Piensa en como las fuentes históricas, muchas de ellas escritas por cronistas masculinos, podrían haber sesgado la percepción de Irene. Their achievements were minimized, and their actions were interpreted through a patriarchal lens, staining the narrative of their intentions and motivations. In more recent times, however, Irene's image has begun to evolve. Historian and feminist studies have reviewed the sources, questioning traditional interpretations and offering more nuanced perspectives. It seeks to understand Irene not only through the eyes of her contemporaries, but also in the context of the power structures that molded her and that she, in turn, challenged. Today, you can form your own opinion about Irene. You are no longer limited to the biased interpretations of the past. With access to a greater diversity of sources and perspectives, you can build a more complete and fair image of this extraordinary empress, recognizing both its achievements and its controversies. She is still an enigma, right? But what is Irene today? His reign, as powerful as ephemeral, vanished in collective memory. Despite having governed two empires, the Byzantine and, indirectly, that of his Constantine son Six, his name was lost in the recesses of history. You, when investigating her, discover a fascinating figure, a woman who challenged the rules of her time, an empress who left an indelible mark, although silent, in the Byzantine Empire. Its history reminds us that power, even the most absolute, is fleeting. The greatness of their achievements, the audacity of their decisions, pale in the face of the inexorable passage of time. And although the story has relegated it to the background, you, knowing its history, you recover its figure from memory, recognizing its importance in the complex plot of the Byzantine Empire of the 8th century. Irene, the woman who ruled 2 empires, died forgotten, but her legacy endures in the annals of history. Its history is a reminder of the fragility of power and persistence of memory, a testimony that even the most prominent figures can be eclipsed by the passage of time. You, however, have discovered its story, and that keeps it alive. So, do you wonder how a woman achieved so much power in such a macho time? The answer is complex, but is based on a skilled combination of intelligence, political cunning, and also a little luck. His marriage to Leon IV was the first step, but his ability to navigate the complex world of the Byzantine court, full of intrigues and conspiracies, was key to his ascent. And what about his son, Constantine VI? His joint reign was a complex power dance. Although initially she acted as regent, the ambition of both and the power struggles in court led to an inevitable confrontation. It was a fight for the control of the empire, a conflict that ended with Irene as the only ruler. But was it really as bad as some historians say? La verdad es que su legado es complejo. While some accuse her of excessive cruelty and ambition, others highlight their administrative reforms and their contribution to Byzantine art and culture. The story, as always, offers different perspectives, and judging it from our current perspective is a difficult task. Prosody is speak. Speak. Prosody rate equals 90%. Finally, why do we forget it? The answer probably lies in the fragility of historical memory. His reign was relatively short, and the subsequent fall of the Byzantine Empire eclipsed many important figures in its history. In addition, history, mainly written by men, often ignores or minimizes women's contributions. To build this story about Irene, I have resorted to several sources, some more accessible than others. I started with the Byzantine Chronicles, those literary jewels that, although sometimes biased, give us an idea of the political and social context of the time. Imagine reading between the lines, looking for the hidden clues after the words carefully chosen by the chroniclers. It is not easy, but it is fascinating. Then, I deepen modern academic studies. Books and articles of historians specialized in the Byzantine Empire were crucial. Think about the amount of research behind each data that I tell you, the thorough analysis of each document and the interpretation of every detail. It is a detective work, but that allows us to approach the truth. I cannot forget the primary sources, although sometimes they are difficult to interpret. Official documents, letters, even fragments of mosaics or sculptures, everything adds. Each piece, however small, helps us rebuild the puzzle of Irene's life. It's like being an archaeologist in history, looking for the missing pieces to complete the image. Finally, I recommend that you explore these sources for yourself. In the video description you will find links to some of the books and articles that I have used. Investigate, he questions, forms your own opinion. Irene's story is fascinating and is worth deepening. Dare to discover more. I hope you enjoyed learning about Irene. If you liked, like and subscribe for more fascinating stories. What did you think of your legacy? Leave it in the comments. /prosody /speak